Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of The Conjuring. I just woke up because I won't have time to do this at any other time in the day, so I apologize if I stumble over my words or seem a little incoherent. I am really freaking tired. And yes, that is my dog in the background. So The Conjuring is James Wan's newest movie. He was mainly known for Saw, which I, of course, really liked, if not loved, and he followed that up with Dead Silence, which was pretty good, very creepy, but at the same time it was pretty flawed too. Then he followed that up with Death Sentence, which very few people saw. Death Sentence wasn't very good. It had a very crummy screenplay, I thought. And I remember being surprised just because it seemed like that film was being tailor-made for me. It was a throwback to 70s vigilante films, and Kevin Bacon looks like a total junkie. Epic! But unfortunately, I did not enjoy myself very much. Yeah. And of course, he followed that up with Insidious, which was not great, but it was good. Had a very conventional script, but I thought James Wan really delivered in terms of the scares. Very flashy and stylish, but also pretty, intense. So I liked that one too. And now he's given us The Conjuring. Now, I did not hear much about The Conjuring prior to its release. It seemed like whenever I go to any website and they talk about a James Wan movie, it would be Insidious Part 2. Yeah, he did direct that. But I never heard anything about The Conjuring other than the fact that he was apparently making it. Okay, so I'll just wait till the trailer comes out. Well, I'm pretty sure the trailer did come out, but I never watched it. I didn't pursue it online or anything, but usually I'll see a trailer for a fairly high-profile genre flick in the theaters because I usually see high-profile genre flicks. Okay, I'm not sure why. That's kind of making me nervous. It's like Red 2 makes me wonder if the studio has no faith in this project. But unlike Red 2, I did see some TV spots. Unfortunately, the TV spots didn't impress me very much. I thought the bit where the ghost claps was unintentionally funny, and nothing about it really seemed scary. But I think my biggest concern was that I am tired of these Paranormal Activity-esque ghost flicks. Yeah, most of them didn't really jump on the found footage bandwagon, but in terms of story or overall screenplay, they tend to have all the same cliches, the same kind of characters, even the same kinds of scares. And it just got really old. I think this hit hardest when I saw Mama a week ago, even though that was produced by the great Guillermo del Toro. I thought that film was very dull, very cliched, and whenever it tried to do something different, it just fell flat on its face. So I'm just sick of these kinds of films. But what really did make me start to look forward to this one was when it was released for the critics and people actually really liked it. And I'm thinking, this is what I need. I need a really good horror film. This summer has been too disappointing for me. Everything has just been okay. Very few exceptional films. I don't think I've seen a single good horror film this year, but I have to look at what's all come out because I might just be forgetting things. Quiet. So I watched The Conjuring yesterday, and you know what? This film actually did scare me. Would I call it a horror classic? No, but I might call it a great horror film. Now, what is the difference between a great horror or a horror classic and a great horror film? Classic horror films are overall great movies. They aren't just restricted for horror fans. I'm talking like The Exorcist, Alien, stuff like that. Everybody can love them. But this one I don't think is that, just because it still is sort of trapped within the confines of its formula. But at the same time, I will concede that it actually does some new and fresh things with that formula. It actually even has fun with the formula. Clearly, the writer, or writers, I don't remember who wrote this, they understood the cliches that came with most of these films, so they actually had some fun with them. At first, they're playing certain ideas straight, but then, what you think is building up to a typical scare actually ends up turning into a laugh, an intentional laugh at that. Well, let's just first start with the story. It has a very familiar setup. You have a family moving into this new house in the middle of nowhere. It's to get a fresh start. They've had some financial problems. The eldest daughter is kind of a brat because she did not want to move, so she's constantly complaining. The youngest daughter immediately befriends the resident ghost and has no problem with that, even though this kid looks like a corpse. Stuff that we've all seen many, many times before. Then you have the little scares, weird things that might have a natural explanation, but then might not. And, it's very typical. But then it pretty quickly cuts to the pair of paranormal investigators, and it actually focuses on them more than it does the family. This is sort of like a reverse Insidious, where in Insidious they focus more on the family than the investigators. Well, this just kind of flips that around. And I like that because the idea of focusing on paranormal investigators, you haven't seen too many times in modern day paranormal activity themed horror movies. I thought that was actually pretty cool. Now, it doesn't make the film original, but at least they're doing something different. And another thing too, even though it has some of the cliches which I mentioned earlier, they never linger for too long. Like, for example, the bratty daughter only has one or two scenes where she bitches, then she's perfectly fine. So I appreciated that. And even though I'm kind of confused as to why they well, no, actually, I take that back. They bring up that the family has some serious financial issues. They pretty much poured everything into this house and are broke and are in desperate need of work. I at first thought that was kind of tacked on and unnecessary, and very typical of these kinds of horror films to do that. But it actually makes sense when you think of that's the reason why they haven't moved, is they have nowhere to go. They put everything into this house. So at least when they do bring up something like that, they at least justify its existence. What else can I say in terms of the story? I really liked how the tone of this film worked. Even though, yes, it is a pretty much straight-up horror film, most of these modern-day ghost movies, they're very bleak, they're very grim, they're very depressing, and the downer ending has become a cliche. Well, in this film, they actually mix in these, darker and scarier moments with, genuine comedy, and it's not necessarily poking fun at itself, and I don't want to say this is a horror comedy. It just happens to have some moments that are really funny, and they really break up the tension, especially during the middle block. It seemed like, it's like everybody is just taking a break from being scared and having a good time, and that really was a nice change of pace. But there are also some really warm-hearted and just beautiful scenes with these characters where you really appreciate what they're fighting for, and it really makes you care for them. And that's a very rare trait to have in especially a modern-day horror film, but even just horror movies in general. So I really liked that. And compared or contrasted to, Mama, for example, which had some, lighthearted and funny scenes, but I never felt those scenes worked. To me, it just undermined the terror. This one did not do that. You always feel like there's a menace in the background, waiting to attack, but whenever the characters just lighten up and have fun and tell jokes, it was a nice breather. In a lot of ways, I'd say this film resembles Paranormal Activity more than it does Insidious. Insidious was more about flash and jumps and old school piano crunching. I love that shit, but this film's much more simple when it comes to its horror films, its horror tactics. That's stupid way to phrase it, but but the difference is whereas Paranormal Activity is very minimalist, it just has a camera rolling and then like a door will move and we're supposed to use our imaginations, and that's what gets us scared. If you did not like Paranormal Activity, don't fret. This film is much faster paced, really like all the stuff that you see in Paranormal Activity and all the sequels and a majority of the clones, the little stuff like that just comprises of maybe the first 30 minutes of this movie. Once it gets beyond that, it just goes all out when it comes to haunting imagery. It uses lighting and shadows really effectively to where you think you might be seeing something in the background, but you can't entirely be sure. The sound is epic. I love how loud certain noises would get, and the music was really chilling and haunting. And it's just an all-around, just really intense and suspenseful horror flick. And I really wish I could explain that better. But let me just say that this film really did get under my skin from a relatively early point in the movie, but it just gets scarier and scarier. And by the halfway point, it's just epic scare after epic scare. And I really had to give credit to some of the creativity when it came to framing and staging these scenes, especially once again how it uses sound. That's an overlooked aspect of the horror genre, is sound, because sometimes what we hear instead of see is what's really scary. So I really liked that. So that's all I honestly really have to say. The film scared me. I thought, or I didn't think. It definitely scared me, and I think that if you like horror films, you definitely need to see this in theaters. Once again, even though I made a Paranormal Activity comparison, this is like, you probably, if you did not like Paranormal Activity, this is probably what you think Paranormal Activity should have been. It takes, the stuff that worked in that film, but then does its own thing and becomes just an all-around intense horror flick. And even though I have to stress, as always, that what scares me might not necessarily scare you. Horror is like comedy in that it is very subjective. But I do think that more people will like this than Paranormal Activity. It won't be quite as polarizing, because Paranormal Activity, that was the extent of it. Either it scared you or it didn't, and if it didn't scare you, then it bored you. This one has a lot more stuff going for it. Great cinematography, strong cast. I thought the actors portrayed their characters very well. And I just really liked it, and that's really all I've got. The only reason I don't want to say it's a horror classic is just because it still is trapped within the formula, even if it does do some new and fresh stuff within it. But otherwise, there's nothing wrong with being a really, really good, if not sort of great, horror flick. So definitely check it out. If you're not a horror fan, then I guess I wouldn't bother, but that's all I've got. So I did a written review. Please check that. You could find it in the show more section below. I also did written reviews for The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail, a Kurosawa movie, Mama, another modern-day ghost film that sucks, and The Kid with the Golden Arm, an old-school kung fu flick which stars the Venom Mob. So read all those too. That is all. I'll see you guys later.